Hope you don't mind me doing my ironing. I must be the only person on the planet who actually enjoys ironing. I can look out of the window, look at the birds, next door neighbour's cat. It's okay, the bird got away. And I can do a bit of praying and some thinking. I think good thoughts when I'm ironing. Today, what I'm thinking about is my Bible study reading. It got me a bit cross, if I'm honest. Here we go. I printed it out. Listen to this. Wives. In the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Then, even if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Don't be concerned about the outward beauty of fancy hairstyles, expensive jewellery or beautiful clothes. You should clothe yourselves instead with the beauty that comes from within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is so precious to God. This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They put their trust in God and accepted the authority of their husbands. For instance, Sarah obeyed her husband Abraham and called him her master. You are her daughters when you do what is right, without fear of what your husbands might do. Husbands. In the same way, you husbands must give honour to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. Well, where on earth is the equality in that? I can hear my daughter squealing if I were so stupid as to read that to her. Oh, 6 verses about women, 1 verse about men, about husbands. I was so cross. I didn't give up. I went on and I read what the study had to say. And they talked a bit about how Paul was preaching to the Gentiles and he stressed total equality of all in the eyes of God. Whereas Peter, he was preaching to the Jewish Christians and he seemed to be going along with traditional Jewish values. Well, I didn't give up there. There was one verse in particular that just sort of didn't quite fit on first reading. So I looked at it again. Here we go. It's right at the end of the bit about wives. For instance, Sarah obeyed her husband Abraham and called him her master. This is the interesting bit. You are her daughters when you do what is right without fear of what your husbands might do. So doing what is right without fear of what your husbands might do. Does that mean that you must do right by God, even if it makes them cross? Is that a tiny bit of a challenge to Jewish male dominance? I looked at some other translations. That one was NLT. So here we go. The Good News translation says, "You are now her daughters if you do good and are not afraid of anything." Doesn't really get us anywhere, does it? The Message was a bit better. "You'll be true daughters of Sarah if you do the same, unanxious and unintimidated." Okay, well then I looked at my study Bible. And interestingly, both study Bibles I looked at made the same point. And that is that in 1st century AD, if a man became a Christian, then his whole household would join in. His wife, his wives, his children, his servants, his slaves, everyone. They would all be expected to follow suit. The problem arose when you had a wife who found Jesus and wanted to become a disciple, but her husband didn't. And that is what Peter was addressing in his letter. He's sort of saying that you must submit to your husband so long as it doesn't impinge on your faith, isn't he? The very, very first verse makes a little bit more sense now. In the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Then, even if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. I think that's saying that they didn't have to rock the boat. They didn't have to challenge their husbands directly about their faith. They didn't have to risk being beaten into submission or even thrown out of the marital home. They could just evangelise by their actions. Begins to look a little bit more like wise advice, doesn't it? Realistic advice. Less like chauvinistic ranting. I still think he could have said a little bit more to the husbands, don't you? I mean, it's the responsibility of those with authority to make social change. I don't know. Wives submitting to their husbands. Jesus submitted, didn't he? He submitted to the Roman authority. He didn't have to. He was the Son of God, for goodness sake. It had no authority over him. But he submitted. And he died for our sins. It seems like a little bit of a small price to pay, doesn't it? To swallow your pride, to accept authority, whether it's from your husband, your boss, politicians, providing you keep your faith intact. Bit of a sweet deal compared with going to the death on a cross. I think my ironing board message for today is that I must be a little bit more humble. I must walk the walk beside people who I disagree with, and do a little bit less talking the talk. Or maybe not so much less talking the talk as shouting the shout. And it always helps to look below the surface, doesn't it? And spend some time with Jesus.